Turn with me to Matthew chapter 24, reading from verse 4. And Jesus answered and said to them, Take heed that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of sorrows. Here we see a deception, wars and rumors of wars, famines, pestilences, and earthquakes. These are the beginning of sorrows. And if we listen to the modern prophets, we'll have a bit more insight as well into how this unfolds. Dr. Maurice Sklar, one of his prophecies spoke of that there would first be a war in the Middle East and then economic problems afterwards. In other words, you would see wars and rumors of wars that would come into effect, and then the famines would come afterwards. And so we see the wars and the rumors of wars and the famines. Deception that's really present in the it's not just in the world, but in the church itself. I will speak to you a little with that, with renewing the mind and how that has actually come into the church. But let us just first look at world events. I've been looking at David Wilkerson, Reverend David Wilkerson, the late Reverend Wilkerson, his book called The Vision. I think it was written in 1974, I think it was 73 or 74. And I've been just having a look at chapter 1. And if we look at what he wrote, in the vision, we see it's titled Economic Confusion. A crash is coming. It starts off with an economic crash, and then he moves on to earthquakes and other things that are, I think chapter 2 is to do with earthquakes, drastic weather changes and earthquakes. And he speaks of the greatest earthquake in the history of the United States taking place. But he starts off first with economic confusion. And no doubt many of you out there have heard the prophecies of Louis Vogel Sharp. She's been saying that the crash of the century is going to happen in 2019, and that we're in the crash right now. We know on Wednesday, I think it was the 15th. Let me just go back to that. It's on Wednesday, the 14th of the 8th of August. There was an 800-point drop in the Dow Jones. And it was the fourth largest single-day point decline in US stock market history. And a short while before that, there was a 767-point decline. That was on August the 5th. And then on the 14th, It's about 9 days, 10 days, a little over a week afterwards, another decline of 800 points. And on that day, there was an inversion of the yield curve, and this sent investors into panic mode, and the selling began. An inversion of the yield curve is a sign that a recession is coming. And we also noted on that day that the German economy moved into recession, and there's of course the trade war between the United States and China. So we see really almost a stock market crash in process taking place. Is this what this prophet spoke of? He said the crash of the century at 1929 crash happens this year. In other words, what's just happened would be part of this process of this crash, and the greatest part of the crash is just ahead of us. And once the crash takes place, things develop, dominoes start falling, and eventually there's a collapse of the dollar, maybe a few months after that. And we've seen the beginning of this war with Iran. We've seen drones shot down by the United States, also by Iran. Maybe the war has already started, the Middle East war. We've seen maybe the beginnings of it, and now it's the economic collapse. Remember, it was said that after Billy Graham's death, that he would be a sign of the age of grace, that it would be coming to a close, and that God's hand is going to be lifted off the Western nations after this Middle East conflict. Maybe this conflict has already begun, in a sense, and now the economic collapse is taking place. And this is the economic collapse that many have spoken about for many years. We saw the collapse in 2008, but everyone has known that the greater collapse would happen later on. And is this the time of this great collapse? And eventually the person of the Antichrist will come with a new world order. Eventually there will be a one world economic system, and eventually the mark of the beast, a digital maybe system that it replaces the dollar as the world reserve currency. So we're right in the midst of that right now. Are we right in the midst of the economic collapse? I think we need to also look at the vision, chapter 1. Let us look at what David Wilkerson wrote about. And this was in 1973, 1974. He first said that a false economic boom will precede the recession. In other words, this whole collapse, what's coming, he terms the recession. But he says a false economic boom. This is a vision that he had of what's to come in the future. And the question is, has it happened in the past, or is it still to come? And no, it hasn't taken place. It hasn't fitted perfectly. It hasn't been a perfect fit with 2008 or anything in the past. So this seems to be right now that this recession, this sign that we saw, that everybody was afraid of, that signifies that the recession is coming. Is this the recession that David Wilkerson spoke of in his book, The Vision? And I'm investigating this. I'm looking at the book and I'm comparing what's written there and what's happening today. Is it a perfect match? Is it a perfect fit? And one of the things I'm looking at, he made a statement in this book, in chapter 1, he said, a false economic boom will precede the recession. And my question is, what is a false economic boom? Is it not what happened after 2008? It was artificially raised up with quantitative easing. The economy was pushed up artificially. Is this not the false economic boom? I don't think anything else could qualify as a false economic boom in the past. Only this period right now that we've been through, only this qualifies as a false economic boom. That means that we're right in the period now that this is the recession that he was speaking of. Because we've just come out of this false economic boom since 2008, 2009. And now he says this comes right before the recession. So he's just giving us so we can know exactly when it will take place. And according to this, just this one sentence, I think this what's coming now is exactly what he was speaking of. He also said something rather strange. He said, not only is the American dollar headed for deep trouble, but so are all the other world currencies. Now the question is, how can all the world currencies be headed in trouble at the same time? For example, if the dollar is weakens and another currency is strengthened, how can all the currencies be affected at the same time? This is what people are speaking of, a race to the bottom. It's a lowering of interest rates to stimulate the economy. See, countries are doing that. They're bringing the interest rates down. The United States started doing this. They cut the interest rate by 1/4 percentage point on the 31st of July 2019. This was the first reduction since 2008. So we see it here at the start of it. And other countries are following with this as well. They're reducing the interest rates. They'll do it slowly, but they'll be actually weakening their currencies. Eventually some will be going into negative interest rates. So this is how all currencies will be affected. In fact, it's the only way they can be affected is by actually the lowering of the interest rates. That's how it's done. And of course, this is positive for precious metals and for cryptocurrencies, because it's less and less interest is being offered, and even negative interest. So this is obviously positive for those wanting to invest in the safe havens such as the precious metals, gold, silver, and the cryptos. So that's also true what David Wilkerson wrote in this book. He said, I see total economic confusion striking Europe first, and then affecting Japan and the United States, Canada, and all other nations shortly thereafter. And we see Europe is very weak. And we are no doubt keeping an eye on Deutsche Bank. It's almost at a place of going bankrupt. And the derivatives associated with this bank, and it can bring down all the other banks in Europe, as well as Germany itself, because Germany is very much tied up with this investment bank, with Deutsche Bank. We've just heard that Germany has gone into recession, and they're struggling with this Brexit. So this is also happening, that Europe is struggling. And he said, it is not really a depression I see coming, but a recession of such magnitude that it will affect the lifestyle of nearly every wage earner in America and around the world. Countries that now control huge amounts of Western currency are going to be in very deep trouble also. Remember, those with Western currencies seem to have the lowest interest rates. They've been doing this more than anyone else, reducing their rates to weaken their currencies. And I'm just going a bit down through this chapter, and also the response of the United States. Does that not correspond to the current president, to President Donald Trump? Look at the way it's written in chapter 1. It says the United States government is going to overreact to confused economic developments. I see a flurry of near panic decisions being made by various government agencies, and these hasty efforts to shore up the economy will backfire. So we see like an overreaction, near panic, hasty efforts. And then it says the President of the United States, it doesn't say who it is, but it says the President of the United States will make 1 and possibly 2 national radio and television appearances to reassure the nation that all is well and that the best of economic times is just ahead. Doesn't that sound like Donald Trump? Saying the economy is great. American economy is just great. It will not work. This is what Reverend Wilkerson, he says, it will not work. People would distrust these statements, and their fears will lead to a revolution at the polls. Is this referring to 2020, the elections in the United States in 2020? It's a very interesting article that I read as well, that let me just, that said here that if the recession began in the second half of this year of 2019 and the first half of 2020, the Americans would suffer greatly by the time the election day rolls around. But if this recession happened later, then it may not affect the elections. But if it happens now, that this will have a tremendous impact on the elections. If the US economy plunges into painful recession, the game completely changes. The timing of the next recession will be key. This is just from an article, just showing, highlighting the truth, what Wilkerson said, what he said here with this. It says, and in this article it says, and a global economic slowdown would be terrible news for the Trump campaign, because the entire narrative depends on President Trump making the economy great again. And according to a CNN poll from earlier this year, the performance of the economy is one of the main reasons for its current level of support. A CNN poll from late May found that 26% of those who approve of Trump's job performance said it was made because of the economy. So we see, going back to the book in chapter 1, it says the President of the United States will make 1 and possibly 2 national TV appearances to reassure the nation that all is well and that the best of economic times is just ahead. Think about that. Is that Donald Trump? A revolution at the polls. Does this mean that this economic collapse must take place now? If it takes now into the beginning of next year, then the Americans will be hurt, and it will lead to a revolution at the polls, according to that article. So maybe what that prophet has said, that we're right in it now, the crash, maybe this is correct. This is true. It all does fit into place. And it speaks here of a rush to the country, that there will be a sudden rush to buy farms, ranches and homes in the country. Thousands will attempt to flee from cities, hoping that a return to the land and nature will provide security. There will be a growing urge to get away from it all, and much money will be invested in land and acreage in rural areas by people who have secret dreams of raising their own food and cattle and becoming self-supporting. And this is what people are speaking of, safe havens. You see that with this Louis Vogel shop, you see it with Jim Baker, all with these safe havens. So that is happening now. And it also speaks of inflation. Inflation will force a new crisis between labor and management. This is with things that will happen during this time. Tremendous inflation. He mentions that people who spend recklessly and buy needed material things will suffer the most. And it's not a time to go into debt, it's a time to prepare, a time to get clear out of under any heavy financial burdens. He also speaks of, he says, not even gold will provide security. He says gold prices are soaring, but those who are investing in this commodity, hoping to find security, are in for a tragic surprise. The price of gold is going to rise astronomically, but it will not be sustained over a long period of time. Silver will also become a very precious metal, and its price will go wild, but neither silver nor gold will offer real security. The fluctuating and uncertain value of gold and silver will be part of the total picture of economic confusion that grips the world. Believe it or not, even gold will not hold its value. Gold hoarders are going to get hurt badly. This is one of the most significant predictions in this book. Let me repeat that. Gold hoarders are going to get hurt badly. This is one of the most significant predictions of this book. So it appears that gold and silver will rise astronomically, but for a short period of time. So the advice he's giving, if you are in gold and silver, is to be aware that it's not for security, but it will rise in value for a short period of time. Be aware of that. It's very, very important. He also speaks of a new world monetary system. They will develop a call for revamping all world monetary systems into one uniform system. So we see with all this vying to a race to the bottom with this currency war, by lowering interest rates country after country. We see China doing that as well, lowering the interest rates, encountering the tariffs of the United States. So as this currency war hots up and heats up, and the currencies move to the bottom, there will be a call for the revamping of all the monetary systems into one system, a new digital system, a one world economic system. That's where the Antichrist eventually comes in with the mark of the beast. So we see quite a lot of things here. It does seem to fit what David Wilkerson said. It does seem to fit in with what is actually taking place now. And it didn't really fit in with any of the past crises. he even mentions here that all but a few of the radio and television ministries will have to be abandoned. In other words, of your Christian television ministries, there will only be a very few that will still operate once this happens. Most of them will either go bankrupt or just have to be discarded. This is more than a few churches are going to go bankrupt. And he mentioned especially credit card companies, credit corporations. In other words, people living in credit and debt, that's going to be an issue. Bankruptcies. Almost every economic indicator will be gloomy. It will be spotty at first, but it will eventually affect nearly all industry. So we see that this is mentioned in chapter 1 in this book, The Vision. Before anything else is this economic confusion, this recession, this deep recession. And I think it's very significant that we're right at this right now, we're right there. The prophecies also indicate that during the time of a dollar collapse, that's when Israel's divided and these earthquakes happen. And that takes place a few months after this collapse. And we know the political plans for the deal of the century. That's only to be released at earliest in around November, maybe even a bit later. So that would all sort of fit in. When eventually that takes place, it's got to be at a time of a dollar collapse, according to the prophecies. And that ties in that we are now moving into this economic collapse. It fits together. It makes sense. He also mentions in chapter 1 that I see great riots coming to many major cities in South America. He says South America will become a powder keg, exploding all directions. And we see with Argentina what's just happened as well. Just watching what's happening there too. And it says, although the economic actions in Europe will trigger the coming recession, the United States will be blamed by most nations for what happens. Why is this? Does this fit in? Does this fit in with what's happening now? I'd say yes, it does. Because you see, President Donald Trump started this trade war with China. And they're going to accuse him. The media, his enemies, they will accuse him and say that because he started this trade war, that this recession is his fault. Even though it says economic actions in Europe will trigger the coming recession. In other words, you see Europe collapsing, maybe Deutsche Bank and other things, and what happens? It says it will actually be in Europe the main beginning of this. But the United States will be blamed by most nations for what happens, because they'll say the trade war is really the problem. So these things all seem to fit in here. One thing that is also important is it says the confusion of the positive thinking preachers. Those who preach that all success is the end result of positive thinking are going to discover that there's another side to the coin. Great losses, confusion and reverses will shatter the thinking process of many people who falsely believe that these successes and economic well-being are the result of their own positive thinking. Those who have minimized the sovereignty of God and who have substituted mental attitudes for reformed hearts will be exposed as false teachers. So It's basically this gospel of being positive, and it's very much actually the word faith teaching. And they've brought in the renewing the mind is just taking the word of God, but certain promises in the word, and it's about being positive, confessing, and it's a thin veneer of Christianity. But they haven't realized that the actual renewing of the mind, or taking it from basically from a quiet time to all of life, that's been very important, whether you're a reformer in the Great Reformation or wherever it is. That's very important. All Christians agree that it's not just in the time alone with God. Our Christianity needs to affect everything in our lives, and how we move from that time of prayer to all of our lives. That's very important. And Apostle Paul speaks of renewing the mind, but what he meant by that, it differs with different people. The word faith have got a different way of putting what it means to renew your mind. But we need to, if we go back to the scriptures, what Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, we see he introduces something a bit different with abandoning ourselves to the sovereignty of God. It's more with this, the Lord being sovereign. It's actually, it's different to what's being taught by the word faith. And if you need to, I recommend a book, Experiencing the Depths of Jesus Christ by Jean Guyon. She explains it very well, how the sovereignty of God comes in here, and how it takes you from a time alone with God in prayer to all of life. And this is what David Wilkerson was speaking of in here. He says, those who have minimized the sovereignty of God and who have substituted mental attitudes for reformed hearts will be exposed as false teachers. So we see a lot of the church, Laodicea and the lukewarm church, are going to have problems as this economic trouble comes, because a lot of what they believe and what they've been taught will clearly be wrong, and they won't be really established in Jesus Christ, in Psalm 91, properly in the sovereignty of God. This is what David Wilkerson's speaking of. He's saying that those people that with this kind of teaching, and that's basically most of the church today has been influenced by this. It's only a small remnant that God has restored his relationship properly with them. Most of the church are going to find that what they have is totally inadequate for this economic collapse. They're going to find they're going to have the shock and a revelation that what they've been listening to for all these years is empty. It has no power, and it's really not. They've missed the truth. They're going to have to repent and turn back to Jesus Christ, or fall away from him. But this is what David Wilkerson speaks of, and this is going back to Matthew 24. This is take heed that no one deceives you. This is the deception. So we see, as in Matthew 24, it says, right, going back historically, it says, assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down, speaking of the second temple. And in the same way that these deceivers, this deception will be exposed as the famines come, as this recession comes, brings famine. It will expose those that bring this deception, and a lot of these churches, a lot of these ministries that teach this, these stones will come tumbling down, their buildings will come tumbling down, their ministries will collapse, because people will see what it is. They will see the falseness of what's being taught. And a lot of the gospel that's coming forth from America is like this. And it's going to fall. It's a lukewarm Laodicean Christianity. So if we look at these signs carefully, we're seeing this deception. And this is the deception. Take heed that no one deceives you. We've spoken of the famines, of how this great crash takes place, and then there's a collapse of the dollar. And we mustn't forget the wars and the rumors of the wars. And many of these prophecies indicate there's going to be a war in the Middle East that takes place. Iran's involved in it, Israel. And this is really the beginning of a World War III. And that there will be some say this will start with the sinking of the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Gulf or somewhere close by. So this war seems to start in the Middle East, but then there's a false flag. There's a attack, I think, on American soil, something greater than 9/11 that takes place. And this really is the kickoff event that leads you fully into World War III. So you see there's definitely a move towards war. We see a bit more with the war and the rumors of war, what's actually happening, how it all ties together. We see the famines, this economic, the crash and the dollar collapse. Wars and rumors of wars. We see the deception, how it's exposed as this economic collapse comes. And the earthquakes. There's been a lot with as Israel's divided, that the New Madrid fault and with California, with the tremendous earthquakes, and maybe with the meteor from asteroid from heaven striking near Puerto Rico and splitting the United States. There's been much prophetic words concerning this as well. So each of these beginning of sorrows, there's actually a lot to each one of these. To the earthquakes, these are great earthquakes. But it seems like it's first, we're dealing with this deception. It's been here for a long time. But now we're right at the brink of this famine, of this. Some have said it's the opening of the third seal in the book of Revelation. But however you take it, it seems like this is the beginning of a crash and the collapse of the dollar, and also the wars and the rumors of the wars, that we may see this war break out in the Middle East fairly soon. And then there's also the deal of the century coming together. It's Daniel 9:27, the covenant with many nations. So that's all coming together here. So I'm just giving you a little bit of an update of what is happening. And also want to remind you that I do offer a course here on the Academy which goes deeper into this foundation of being established in Jesus Christ. And this clearly shows you the difference between true revival and false revival. And there are many people in the church in Laodicea, in the lukewarm church today, that are putting forward their teaching as if this is the way it should be. And many young Christians and people that are maybe worldly, that are really not spiritual people, they cannot discern things, and they just go with what they say. And they have large ministries, a lot of money, influence, and they draw in people. But what they're being pulled into is all this. It's a deception. It's into Laodicea they're being pulled into, not into the call out of Laodicea. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. And I show the difference very clearly and introduced the true foundation that you need to have in your lives in these courses. So don't forget to visit the academy and to have a look at these courses, because they indicate the narrow way, the way that we should be on. It's a hard path, a narrow path, and what to avoid, because there's certain things that are taking place, certain movements and things which are not on the narrow way. We need to be aware of these things. So please don't forget to look at the academy. God bless. This is Apostle Derek from South Africa. God bless.